All right, guys, welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. Today, we have another special guest. He happens to be in Cincinnati doing his prelim year for anesthesiology at the same time I am. So I was able to be lucky enough to get him here in our wonderful studio, as you can see, in person. Patrick LeFevre, MD. He is a graduate of the University of Chicago, where did you graduate with honors at UChicago? I'm pretty sure you did.
And I graduated with a degree in biological sciences, as many pre-meds do, with honors.
Yeah, I assumed so. I don't think you ever told me that, but I just figured. He is also the record holder for the 60-meter hurdle at UChicago. But in my opinion, his most impressive attribute is his loyalty to the Chicago Bears. It's
It has not been an easy decade, I'll say. But our time will come. Don't you worry about that.
Well, as a Pats fan, I'm about to feel some of the same pain that you're feeling right now, I think.
You will.
So, yeah. He, of course, went on to be a med student at the University of Cincinnati with yours truly, where he ended up ranking in the top 25% of the class and went on to score in the top 1% of test takers for the USMLE Step 1 and Step 2, which is, if for anyone that has ever studied for these exams, is an absolutely extraordinary thing to do. That's one of the two main reasons why I've asked him to come on, talk about his study habits, what he would attribute his success to, and how you all can benefit from some of his insight into how he studied and how he prepared for these tests. So, two important matters to get out of the way. Your deadlift max.
Of course, 385. But that was a long time ago now.
Okay, 385. Well, Shams is 405. So.
Oh well. Yeah. Oof. I got to rewatch episode 1.
And spirit animal.
Oh, that's a good one. I would have to go with probably Falcon. Honestly,
Falcon.
Yeah, I do like having my own space, valuing my independence, and I feel like that really resonates with me, and picking a falcon sort of as my spirit animal. But of course, now I have to ask you what yours is.
I did not think this through.
Ooh, not ready for questions coming back.
No. I clearly did not learn from my interviews. But I would say my spirit animal is the turtle.
Turtle.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I can be a little slow sometimes, but I tend to think that I always win the race.
Okay.
and I protect this house. That's another reason why.
I can't say I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think I think this is a good one. Good on. Yeah, we'll go with that. So let's just get right into it. So as I mentioned, he scored in the top 1% on both Step 1 and Step 2 CK, which are the two most important tests in medical school that you have to take before you go on to apply residency and get ranked for programs. So how would you describe, the study methods and the way you prepared?
So actually touching on something you and Sham talked about in episode 1, where we figure out how to study during undergrad in order to get into medical school. But then, of course, once you get to medical school, it's a whole different ballgame. And I would say even studying for STEP can be a little different than studying for your normal courses. What I found to be the most beneficial was, it really comes down to practice questions. You have to simulate the test taking environment as much as you can. And for me personally, flashcards and Anki didn't really work for me. Reading out of a textbook, I know doesn't work for most people really anymore, now that we have other options to pick from. And of course, for practice questions, UWorld remains the gold standard. There's no getting away from that. Mm-hmm. I would say I went through UWorld completely twice, and then did residual incorrects or certain areas of study for a third pass. And I did a little bit from, what were some of the other ones? Amboss, mm-hmm. and one of the other Q banks that's out there. But really, the most important thing for me was doing these practice questions and going through, 3,000 of them and doing them all over again. That you're not going to retain anything doing that. You have to take notes on what you've learned, making, whether it's flashcards or just a Word document about the different categories of diseases, different diseases and their presentations, effects, treatments, etc. And you have to go through those. And one thing I think UWorld actually does really well is it forces you to think about the differential. You know, all of your answer choices might be different, similarly presenting things. And the most important thing to go from that was how to form the differential and come at it from multiple directions. So what I did, and I reviewed these things all the way up until my test state, was create lists of differentials, not only starting with a disease, but also starting with symptoms. So let's say the symptom was thrombocytopenia. That's what someone's presenting with. And I would just list out all the diagnoses that would come from that I picked up through my first pass of UWorld, because of course, some of those things you may have learned 2 years ago during early M1, and you're not going to remember that by step 1 time. So if you get the type of UWorld question that starts with symptoms and you need to make a diagnosis, you're making that differential in your head once you see thrombocytopenia or whatever that sort of anchoring symptom is. The other way to come at it, and the other type of UWorld question, of course, is they give you the diagnosis and you have to figure out what might be coming down the line, other complications, etc. And so by learning about lupus, starting with thrombocytopenia, maybe as the presenting symptom, or starting with lupus, or starting with thrombocytopenia and getting to the diagnosis of lupus, it just provides more pathways in your mind to getting to the same information. And when it comes to test time, of course, speed is going to be your friend, because you have a lot of questions to get through, through all of your practice exams, through the real exam itself, and being able to make those mental connections, you know, concept mapping, and coming at it from 2 different angles. I found that helped me retain the material a lot more easily.
Definitely. And something you mentioned is the fact that after your first pass of the material, you know, you get a question wrong, you read why you got it wrong, and you think to yourself, most people will think to themselves, you know, in the moment, okay, I know why I got it wrong. Awesome. Next time I see this question, I'll have it down. No, absolutely you will not. You will not remember that question, and you'll fall for the same exact mental trap that you did the first time. That happened to me so many times. And some of the ways that you said that, you know, taking notes after questions that you got wrong, like, was it questions that you got wrong and questions that you got right, and maybe questions that you got right, but you kind of got lucky, or, you know, you didn't feel confident you were going to get it right if it was presented in a different way?
No, I took notes on all of them. And I think the highest yield ones are going to be where they give you several different diagnoses to choose from that all may present with, you know, the same symptom. Someone comes in with abdominal pain, or, you know, fever, or what have you. And it's going to be your job, not only on this exam, but then of course, as an actual physician in the real world, that you're going to have to make those differentiations, and probably in a pretty short period of time. You know, now that we're studying for step 3 currently, and, you know, we do have the benefit of having some real world experience. You know, I've spent a few months in the ICU so far during my prelim year. And when I get a question about someone who's coming in with undifferentiated shock or respiratory failure or experiencing delirium in the hospital, I've seen a lot of cases of that so far, and it's not hard to apply that to the test taking situation. But when you're studying for step 1, step 2, I mean, you really don't have the clinical experience to draw from in order to confidently and quickly come to that answer during the test. So all you have to rely on is your previous test taking preparation. And that's why I'm saying that doing those practice questions, making notes, forming differentials, and trying to come at it in creative ways, it's going to help you start thinking in that way once you get to residency itself.
Yeah. And I have to say, you're probably the only med student that I know of anyway, that used that differential, that, you know, from scratch made your own differential diagnosis for each common, you know, complaint, lab finding, symptom, etc. Something that I was too lazy to do, or at least didn't think that the juice would be worth the squeeze for me, but I think I probably would have benefited from it. But for something that, a difference that I noticed for step 2 compared to step 1 is that the length of time that you're actually studying for step 2, even though you're not doing dedicated study for step 2, you're studying for shelves, you're studying, you're doing practice questions, at least, if you're a good third-year student, you're doing practice questions all through your rotation leading up to each shelf. And so without even, if by studying for shelves, you're studying for step 2.
Absolutely.
And for me, I felt that was one of the biggest reasons why at least my step 2 score improved a lot, was because I was exposing myself to the high yield material for almost a year, but prior to the step 2 exam.
Absolutely. And to build off of that, something I think that's important to say now, when we took step 1, it really mattered. Like, that was kind of the gold standard in terms of what you could even apply to specialty wise. What was your step 1 score? And we took it in the midst of COVID and all of that, and that's a story for later. But
yeah,
couple years after we took step 1, it changed to pass fail. And one of the problems I see with that, of course, step 2 just being far more important now, but also, people aren't going to necessarily prepare as studiously for step 1 because, you just need to pass. It's not going to hurt your residency application. But kind of going off what you said, earlier exposure to that material is going to be beneficial. So if you really prepare well for step 1, it's going to help you for step 2, because granted, a lot of the biochemistry, genetics, it's not necessarily as applicable to step 2, but a lot of those foundational concepts, you're going to see that over and over and over again. And so don't take step 1 lightly just because it's pass fail, because you'll be surprised how long it takes to learn that step 2 material if you don't have a good foundation.
Absolutely. I think probably the most important thing to do when studying for these exams is, honestly, I don't like the idea of a dedicated study period, because it limits the amount of time that you're exposed to the high yield material for the exam to 4-6 weeks.
Right.
When I realized that, at least for me, doing those practice questions, specifically UWorld, like UWorld is gold standard. You should just be doing UWorld if you do any question bank. Doing those as early as possible, even if it's just 5 or 10 questions a day, will compound so much by the time you take the test, that just doing 5, maybe 10 questions a day and increasing the intensity, of how many question banks you do closer to the test, so you build the stamina and endurance, but focusing on the content review early on with just 5 or 10 questions a day is so much better for your score than cramming, doing 80 to 120 questions a day every day for 6 weeks.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And not only good for your score, but good for your mental health too. We had the additional constraints of the first COVID lockdowns, so we couldn't go anywhere if we tried. So we were just inside studying all day anyways, which certainly got old after a while. But, in those last few weeks leading up to your exam, you do want to be focused more on just test taking endurance, following through on your strategy, seeing what works for you after sitting there and focusing for 4, 5, 6 hours in a row. If you're trying to do that as well as learn a lot of this material for the first time, you are going to be extremely stressed out. And it's going to be a stressful experience regardless of how prepared you feel. But the easier you can make it on yourself in that home stretch, the better.
Yeah. And like, building off that, I would say that when you're in that dedicated period, because I think every school just about will give you a dedicated study period for step 1. And step 2 is a little bit more iffy. You have to schedule it yourself between 3rd and 4th year typically, but don't take the entire 16 hours of waking hours to study for step. Like, you want to schedule out blocks of intense, deep work, maybe 2 to 4 hour blocks at a time, whatever works for you. I think everyone has a different a different level of endurance when it comes to studying this, very dense, very information rich material. It should be sprints followed by rest, in my opinion. I don't think it should be, and I'm saying this because I've made this mistake, and I think I made it many days for step one in a row, where I would just be studying constantly with like only 5-10 minute breaks for 12 to 14 hours in a day. And at the end of the day, I think it just doesn't do anything for your retention. I think if anything, you're just exhausted and overloaded with information. So sprint, rest, kind of like the lion hunts for its prey 2 hours a day and then rests the rest of the day.
Yeah, 22 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But it's an important point, we the problem that I think we run into, especially as med students, after going through pre-med, kind of the rat race to get into med school, surviving your preclinical years, is, you may feel like you just have to study all the time. That's your job. That's all you're able to do. But if you're not prioritizing getting a good night's sleep when you're studying this hard, eating a good diet, doing just a little bit of exercise, maybe not every day, but several days a week, you would be shocked at the impact that can have, and just with retaining information and how you feel physically when you sit down to do, a few hours in a row of studying.
Yeah. And I think, some of my best study days were, when I took an hour, half hour to an hour to just go for a run in between, doing 2 blocks and then reviewing those 2 blocks, or however many blocks, 3-4 blocks. And I think once you get to a certain point of your studying, how well you perform on the test no longer depends on your content review. It depends more on your ability to perform on the test.
That is very accurate.
I think that's a realization that once I came to that realization before step 2, and I realized, all my block scores are falling in between these 2 percentages. And it just really depends on what questions I get. And there's guaranteed to be a percentage of questions on the exam that you're supposed to get wrong. Like there is that tail end of questions that literally, it's the reason that nobody gets a perfect score on step, at least that I know of. No. I mean,
and someone may come to you and say, hey, I've done 10,000 practice questions and I'm still getting some wrong. And I would say, well, yeah, there's an infinite amount of information out there. And certainly as little M2s and then M3s taking step 1 and 2, you're never going to get everything right, but you have to, give yourself a chance to learn and know that I can get a certain fraction of these wrong and still get that target score that I want.
Exactly. You get to a point where, pounding out more practice questions gives diminishing returns. Just to give a personal anecdote, before step 2, you might remember where I was probably the week before, it was just about 1 week before I was taking step 2. And I was confident that I was going to do well, but I was so burnt out from studying that I just remember being on FaceTime with my parents and being like, I think I was being I was like, I'm so freaking tired. I think I don't think I meant it, but I was like, I need to take a break from medicine. and my dad was like, nope, you're coming to Connecticut. You need a break.
Yeah, I remember.
So he was like, get tickets to Connecticut, come home, hang out with us for a little bit, and then go back, take your test. And M1, M2, Tim would have been like, no, I can't take any time off. I need to study every single day and maximize my score. But if anything, I think that break actually boosted or made no change to my score. Because I went into the test, I went home, I got to see my friends who I hadn't seen in a long time. I played baseball, I played in a game with my old baseball team, came back, was ready for the test, refreshed emotionally, physically, well rested, and ready to go. And so, just from what I know about you, being in prime physical and mental shape from getting enough sleep, eating well, and exercising, half hour day. It doesn't have to, you don't have to be deadlifting 385 pounds every day, but go on a run, get some cardio, boost your BDNF,
Mhm.
and make sure that you're actually able to mentally perform for an 8-hour marathon.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And are you really going to boost your score by 10 points in those last few days of studying for an exam you've been studying for an entire year for? Of course not. But the factors you can control, like he was just saying, those lifestyle modifications, as it were, that can actually make a big difference on test day and how you yourself perform.
I would actually argue that most really smart med students that don't perform as well as they should on these exams is because they're staying up too late studying. It's because they're putting, you know, we're all putting too much pressure on ourselves. And I think that's warranted because these tests are very important, but putting so much pressure on yourself that you don't allow yourself to eat a good breakfast, eat something better than fast food that you're squeezing in between study cramming at 3 a.m. Like, you can't treat, I did that in college. It did the job, does not do the job for this volume of information.
Yeah.
By any means. So anyway, I think there's a lot to learn from somebody like Dr. LeFevre. Do you have anything else you'd like to add for those 280 hopefuls out there?
Well, so first I'll retouch on something I had mentioned before about starting early. Take step one seriously. The pass doesn't matter as long as you get it, right? But that's not the goal anymore. The goal is not to just pass step one because, most of us will do that with a decent amount of preparation. But the goal is to get what you need on step two, now that that's the only standardized exam we have.
The new step one.
To get to where you need to go. So start early, start with practice questions, and don't be afraid to take a step back, review some notes, and get creative with it. There's no one right way to do everything. And some people have said that Anki got them through med school, got them through every board exam. And that's great. That's great for them. It didn't work for me. It didn't work for you. Me. But if that works great for you, awesome. If you want to try what I did for the step exams, go for it. We just want people to do the best that they can so they have the most possible options when it comes to getting their preferred residency spot. And we're happy with where we are ending up after our prelim years, and a lot of that came from finding a way that worked for us to do well on the step exams.
Just to highlight different ways of studying, like when I transitioned to third year and studying for shelves in step two, my primary study method was UWorld. I didn't even I used UWorld and online med-ed, and
gotcha.
I did the review, like I did content review with online med-ed, but that doesn't cover everything. It probably covers like 80% of what you need to know,
right,
give or take. And then UWorld, you use that and they give you kind of the more details. They flesh out the details for you. But yeah,
I think those kinds of resources, online med-ed, boards and beyond, they're certainly very useful for topics that you feel that you just don't know anything about. Like to get a really solid overview of a particular topic or something that you just need to review over and over. Like for me personally, if I remembered what the cardiac murmurs sounded like and where to auscultate them longer than a week, it would have been a good study session. But those are good for that quick review. And then so when you do go into the practice questions, which should be the lion's share of what you're doing to prepare for both shelf and for step two, you at least feel like you have a solid foundation under you.
Definitely. All right. So next, salient topic that I can't wait to ask you about. I think when we both started med school, I was the self-proclaimed finance guru in the apartment. So we were roommates for 3 years.
If you couldn't tell,
that's how we know each other so well. And obviously great friends. So I thought that I was the hot stuff, knowing all the investment strategies and automatic savings and how to budget your money. But then this guy well surpassed my finance knowledge in like one summer. I think it was, during M4 when we had so much extra time on our hands that he probably read like 10 finance books in like 2 weeks, and we're about to find
Had a
out
lot
his
of
wealth.
time.
We're about to get his wealth of knowledge on the matter. But on a more serious note, I think this topic of personal finance is one that is criminally overlooked for medical professionals. I think doctors, are a class of professionals that are very prone to lifestyle creep, especially in, you start out, you want to go to a good college, you have debt from college, then you get accepted to medical school. Phenomenal, amazing accomplishment. You go through 4 years of medical school. Your only focus during med school is to get the best grades possible, to score high in the USMLEs, to match residency, and to go train in your desired specialty. During that time, for up and coming doctors, there's little time to think about finances. It seems to be of secondary importance to our studies and our professions, because we think to ourselves, oh, we're going to be making so much money, we're going to be making 6 figures, we can worry about that later. I know that I used to think that way.
Yeah.
I'm happy that I have changed my ways, and I didn't, obviously you have too, which we'll talk about. But a lot of doctors fall into the trap of, once they finish residency, because in residency, you'll make 60, 70 on average, depending on where you're working. And then not nearly enough to cover your debts. And when you get out of residency, you finally get your big paycheck. And what do you do? You obviously, you take a loan out on a new car, you mortgage a nice big house, you get a Range Rover for the wife.
Nice first class vacation.
Yeah, just celebrate, right? And so it's, and psychologically, it's so relatable because we work so freaking hard. We put in so many hours, sometimes 80 hours a week, sometimes more. I mean, it's the reality. Yeah. So, how did you come to, the personal finance habits that you implement now? And I guess first, talk a little bit about what they are and why they're important.
Absolutely. So I think what really was the motivation for me with getting educated on this in the first place was becoming an M4. We're interviewing for residency. It'll be the first time for many of us having a actual yearly salary. All of us worked, previous summer jobs and maybe part-time to get through school and things like that. And of course, the non-traditional applicants will likely have had a career before medicine too, so they may have already gone through this whole process. But for us, we didn't have that kind of experience. And I had a slightly higher than average loan burden that I was looking at coming out of med school and thinking, oh, geez, I'm going to actually have to do something about this now, because, when you're in school, you take out your loans, you pay your tuition, you don't think about it, because if you think about it, you're just going to stress out about it. There's nothing you can do about it while you're in school. And even in residency, there's not a ton you can do about your loan burden, especially if it's very large. But I heard one thing that I think was very, very logical that no one talks about, which is, as physicians, we're highly specialized, highly intelligent professionals that are very good at what we do. And so a lot of us think, well, we can do this finance thing. Like, how hard can it be? But we actually belong to a group more akin to, lawyers, professional athletes, actors, musicians, where we attain a very high income, but not because we're good with money. A lot of your other upper class, upper middle class individuals, if they started businesses, they work in finance, it's a very, very different type of training and a very different type of outlook on money. You don't have to be good with money to become a great doctor. And obviously many doctors are not great with money because it's not talked about in med school. And I can empathize with med students and even residents saying, I don't even care about the money side of things. I just want to get through training, which is fair because training is hard. I'm in the middle of a stint of ICU overnights right now. And I can tell you, yeah, training's pretty hard. It's hard to focus on other things at the same time. But, knowing that just because you've gotten this far in medicine doesn't mean you don't have some learning to do when it comes to your personal finances. And one thing that stuck with me as well is we all have two careers, basically. The career you go to school for, and being a pension manager for yourself. No one else is going to do it, but you are responsible for managing your finances and making sure you're set up for the retirement that you want and meeting the financial goals that you want, whether it's a particular house or to live in a high cost of living area, car, vacation, whatever it might be. It's on you to figure that out from the money side of things. No one's going to do it for you, you know? So that all comes into play with my realization during M4 of, well, there's a lot of responsibility on my plate. You know, I'm the first one in my family to become a physician. I know you are as well. And, you know, we don't necessarily have someone close to us that's gone through a process like this before, and certainly not with the loan burdens that are average, you know, across the country. So, you know, for me, the first finance book I read was actually the first White Coat Investor book, because it was geared towards physicians. You know, Dr. Dolly, who's the founder of the White Coat Investor, you know, he's an emergency doc, went through this whole process. And so it was very easy to digest. It was very relatable in, you know, reading from someone who knows what the process, what the training, what the loans are like. And from there, I was hooked. I thought it was the coolest thing, learning about all of this. Read a few more books during M4 year, and, you know, started to get an idea of what my own personal plan was going to be. And so at this point, I'll take a pause and say, personal finance is, of course, personal. You know, we certainly can't give any specific financial recommendations right now because, you know, me as a unmarried resident in a medium to lower cost of living area is different from a married resident who is going through the military track versus a resident who has 3 kids to feed in the high cost of living area. It's just, there's a lot that differs there, but there are a few basic principles that I think we can touch on while we're here today. First, I'll say it's pretty straightforward. You just have to make a plan. You know,
and stick with it.
And
do it.
Exactly. You know, budgeting, making a financial plan, it's kind of like making a new diet for yourself. You know, if I, you know, take home $3,500 a month and I'm saying I'm going to save $3,000 a month, of course, I'm not going to stick with that. That's impossible. So you have to be not only realistic in what you're able to do, but also figure out what your goals are. What are you saving for? You know, do you want to pay off your student loans as quickly as possible, or do you want to stretch things out and invest the difference? There's lots of good strategies out there, but you can't do any strategy consistently over the long term, which the only way you have a good strategy is if you stick with it consistently over the long term. Is by figuring out what your goals are and what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your money? And of course, I don't know necessarily what age I want to retire at or how much money I'll need for retirement, but that hasn't stopped me from starting to save. You know, it's not a ton. And of course, as an attending, I'll completely eclipse what I'm able to save in residency, but it's important to make the plan and stick with it. So my plan for right now is I'm just maxing out my Roth IRA for this year. That's it.
Nice.
That's my one thing that I am able to do in addition to my other short-term savings and spending goals. And that's what I'm able to stick with. And it's like using a muscle, right? You can't expect to go through med school, go through residency, not learn anything about personal finance, not save a penny, and then say, okay, when I'm attending and I've gotten to the end of the training, and of course you work hard, you deserve to get all the nice things, but you can't just turn on the savings switch at the same time.
And, you know, a couple of ways that I think about it that make it easier for me to, you know, exercise that muscle, you know, like you said, is if you make, you know, there are people making multiple 6 figures in Silicon Valley living paycheck to paycheck.
Absolutely.
There are people in New York City that are making millions every year at a very prestigious job, and they live paycheck to paycheck. They live in a high cost of living area. They probably have friends that want to go to expensive clubs and parties, you know, buy that $50,000 bottle of, you know, upper shelf liquor for their table service, for their whatever table service. And if you need to think, so there's two ways to think about how to manage your money that really help make it simpler. One is what goes in, what goes out, what comes in minus what comes out is what you keep. That is what your wealth is. Somebody who makes $50,000 a year and saves $10,000 of that year will be wealthier at the end of that year than somebody who makes $2 million and spends all 2 million or more and goes into debt. So that's why you can, most millionaires are people that work as a janitor, a truck driver,
Teachers,
nurse,
firefighters,
simple people with simple money, personal finance habits. Money in minus money out. The second thing is you need to think about your paycheck in terms of percentage. So, you might be saying, oh, well, if I'm only making $50,000 a year, if I'm only making $30,000 a year, how can I save? I can't save if I'm only making this amount. Well, you can save. You can save 10% of what you make, which would be less than 10% of if you made 10 times that or double that. But instead of saving $3,000 a month, you're saving $300 a month. Whatever, depends on your paycheck, depends on your income. So, the way I think about my budget is my budget is currently more skewed toward debt paying. I think about over 50% of my paycheck goes toward debt right now. But, wedding expenses and what have you.
Right.
But under normal circumstances, I think between 20 and 40% of my paycheck goes toward a combination of automatic investments and automatic saving. The automatic part is important to me. And I think it's important for most people because it takes the emotion out of doing it. It does it while you're sleeping. You don't have to think about it. And at the end of the month, you have a nest egg sitting in your savings account that you didn't have to think about. And it also removes the temptation of spending that money from your checking account when you're out, having dinner or going out with your friends. So the way I treat that percentage is I don't think that percentage is going to change very much when I'm making a good amount of money as an attending.
Right.
I think the percentages are going to stay about the same. So in that sense, you can make a financial plan that you can keep no matter what your income is. And obviously, if your life circumstances change, you can always adjust and modify your budget to meet the goals that you have at that time, as long as you are consistent with the principles of saving and investing automatically. I think those two are pretty important for 95% of the time.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing I 100% want to emphasize that you touched on was income is not the same as wealth. They are not the same thing. Income builds wealth if you do that. Like if you use it to build wealth, you will then create wealth. But income is not the same thing. If you have someone who's making $2 million a year, they spend it all on every luxury you could possibly imagine with an income like
Gold
that.
chain.
Exactly. And they retire at age 50, age 60, what have you. Guess what they have? Zero. They didn't build wealth. Sure, they probably
and a gold chain.
And a gold chain, that is true. But they're gonna have to sell that if they're not gonna have an income anymore.
Yeah.
One thing that really became relevant for me was during the pandemic, seeing kind of what was going on out there and how things were changing with job structures, job markets, just all the changes that COVID really brought to the healthcare field. And shortages in the hospitals in terms of equipment and personnel, all of that, I really started to prioritize flexibility, and your income doesn't give you flexibility, because if you were to get fired or if you were to quit, if you don't have anything saved, what are you supposed to do? But if you take that income, you create a plan and you stick with it, you don't let lifestyle creep kind of erode your saving power, you will find that after 10, 20 years of practice, which isn't a full career length to begin with, you're going to see, you know what? I can cut back time. I can spend more time at home, or I can take the teaching or academic job that I've always been passionate about, but I couldn't afford to take the pay cuts, or, my health hasn't been so great these past several years. Maybe I take a sabbatical to just rest and recover and get back to work after things are stabilized a bit. And it's hard to put a price on that, because you can't put a price on time either. Going back to the first example I mentioned, if you're really working hard, putting in a lot of hours, and you just come to a point where you do want to spend more time at home with your kids or new grandkids, maybe you're going to move to be closer to family, you're going to want to have that option. Like, even if you become financially independent, a lot of people who enjoy their jobs are not just going to stop working just because they're able to, but they'll keep going to work because they enjoy it, or they will take that lower paying job because it does have better hours, does have better lifestyle. It gives them more of what they want that's not purely financial. And you don't get to have that kind of flexibility if you don't make a plan. And it does come down to that. And I think it would be beneficial to kind of point out, where to start. Because if you had asked me a year and a half ago about my personal finance habits, I probably wouldn't have had much to tell you, because I hadn't really thought of it very much. I was just trying to get through school. And I would say you could start with a couple of books. Some of my favorites they're pretty quick, very easy to read. Of course, the first White Coat Investor book was very helpful. How to Think About Money by Jonathan Clemens. Very good book, kind of speaks to the why build wealth, why do we save, what are we even saving money for? The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And I would say The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by Jack Bogle, that Tim actually had lent me before, and is actually on the shelf behind us. This was not planned, I swear. We get no advertising benefit from this, but
fantastic book.
These will help you have a very solid foundation and start to make a plan that you think fits best with your life. It's a good place to start. Second would be just making a budget. And people really hate budgeting. I know, and it feels like it's very punitive, it's restrictive. But I see it more as freeing in a sense. Once you have that percentage that you either put towards paying down debt or saving for retirement, once that's done for the month, you can spend all the rest of your money guilt-free, because you've already taken care of the important stuff. And it'll just start out with, look back at your last few months, or maybe even the last year, if that's somewhat representative for your spending. Just see what you're spending money on. You don't even have to put restrictions into place or specific categories when you're starting out. Just see what you're spending money on. You'd be surprised at where a lot of your money is going. But if you just get into the habit of knowing how much is coming in, what it's going out to, and starting to read a little bit on, what overall broad overview personal finance looks like, you're going to find yourself in a much better spot than a lot of late career physicians, unfortunately.
The point you made about a budget being freeing rather than restricting, it sounds corny to say that, like, oh, like discipline equals freedom. Oh, if I spend less money, I'll be free. Like, it's kind of true, but the way I think of it is, if you calculate out your budget, say that 80% of your paycheck is all that you need to cover all of your necessary expenses, plus, some wiggle room. So if every month you only need 80% of your paycheck, then you can budget out 20% of your paycheck as F around money. So, the way I think of F around money is I could take that money at the end of the month, flush it down the toilet, and I met my budget for the month. So if you have a number that you can say, all right, as long as I don't spend this much money on, booze and Pokemon cards, like whatever.
Floats your boat.
Yeah, we don't judge if you're a Pokemon player, Yu-Gi-Oh player, but like if I spend this much on, whatever, if I decide to buy 1,000 neckties this month, as long as that's not more than 20% of my budget, I'm good. I'm rocking. So it's about sticking to that plan and, giving yourself enough room to meet your budget while still living comfortably. I would say that you and I probably are definitely on the more frugal side than most people. So like we're probably, a little more tighter on the collar with our finances, but that's because as med students, well, doctors now, but you go into a lot of debt and, you kind of have to get a little bit more extreme, but that's it's not necessary. I think for us, it's more of like, we really enjoy playing the game of personal finance and we want to crush it.
Absolutely.
And we want to be financially free as early as possible. Going back a little bit further to something you said about, when do you want to retire? Well, I think one day I said to you, I want to have the option to quit by the time I'm 40. Pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
I think I'll do it. But I didn't say, I don't think of retirement as the day that I stop working and I just go live on a beach in Cabo for the rest of my life.
A lot of people think about it.
Yeah, I would lose my mind of boredom if that was like, I literally, like a week into my honeymoon, I was going crazy because I needed something to do. The honeymoon was, had an amazing time, but like our minds just, if you're a doctor, like you just need stuff to do. I think of retirement as, when will I have the option to flip off my boss and say, I'm not coming to work tomorrow, I'm done. I'm like, obviously I'm not saying to do that, but if you wanted to do that, you could, and you'd be well off.
Would really recommend you double check your numbers before doing that.
Yeah, definitely talk to your financial advisor before flipping off your boss.
Yeah.
But yeah, jokes aside, like, that's how I think of it. And that's what financial freedom is. It's the freedom to walk away from your job and have the wealth to provide for you, your family, your friends, if you want, and whoever else you feel responsible for. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, absolutely. And the whole FIRE movement, the financial independence, retire early stuff, a lot of it comes out as, once I reach this number, I flip off my boss and then I'm free forever, right? But obviously the vast majority of people don't fall into that category. I anticipate actually enjoying being an anesthesiologist for a very long time. I'm very excited to finish up my prelim year and really get started learning how to be an anesthesiologist. But, getting to whatever that number ends up being, and, I probably won't be able to know what my number is until married, kids, actually having a house, etc. But the changes you make could be far more subtle than just retiring forever. I may say, all right, I'm 45, I'm 50 years old, I'm not doing 24-hour call anymore. I'm not doing holidays anymore. I'm not doing weekends anymore. I'm cutting back to, 0.7 of full-time employment, whatever it might be. Those little things, especially as you get to your mid and late career, you'd be shocked at how much you still continue to enjoy your job while making all that extra time to do what you're passionate about outside of work. Like, you don't have to continue being 40, 50, 60 hours a week just doing that job and going home if that's not what you're entirely passionate about at that stage of your life. And you gotta have the flexibility to do that when you get to that point.
Definitely. And I think this is a topic that I could write, a 30-page thesis about. It's not just the science, the mathematics of money, it's the psychology of money. It's, there's a lot that goes into it. And if any of you are watching and you want to know more about it, definitely reach out to me. let me know in the comments or send me a DM, an email, and I will be happy to start laying out some of the ways that not just me, but Dr. LeFevre over here think about managing our money, and the ways that we think are simplest and will get you the most success in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's such a broad topic to cover in just a one-off podcast, of course. And there's so many rabbit holes we could go down, talk about investing, asset allocation, asset location, paying off debts, insurance, all of those kinds of things. But I think from what we've covered today, just some of these broad ideas, that's going to be the most important starting point, because if that's what gets you to take a closer look at your own finances and just start to think about these things in the back of your mind, you'd be surprised how much of a difference it makes even early in your career.
Mm-hmm. It's something that, and just, if you're looking to learn more, you don't want to reach out to me or Dr. LeFevre over here, and you think that that we're too intimidating to approach, definitely check out the White Coat Investor podcast. That is, the Dr.
Dolly.
Dr. Dolly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've listened to his podcast as well. He has a number of different people who have achieved financial freedom early in their careers, and talks a lot about how that works. And it's just a great place to learn more, especially if you're a medical professional.
Absolutely. And the White Coat Investor blog too has articles on everything you could possibly imagine relating to finances and all of its various aspects. I will also say that one physician I've been following, the blog is called Dr. Pay It Back. It's actually an anesthesiologist who has detailed their journey from fellowship through their first few years as an attending, going over their budget, what their financial goals are, how he's handled student debts, buying a house, etc. And it's nice to have a real life example too, and seeing these things put into practice, and the pitfalls and the adjustments that need to be made. Because of course, life doesn't exist on a spreadsheet. You can have these very exact percentages, exact numbers, but seeing how things work in real life is going to help you tailor your plan as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a great discussion about money, something that people need to get more comfortable talking about for sure.
Absolutely. Certainly in medicine, I think, especially.
Definitely need to, once you become less afraid of talking about money and income, and becomes less of a stigma for you, I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles to jump before moving toward financial freedom. So, all right, Dr. LeFevre, on to more personal topics.
Oh, yes.
Why did you become a doctor?
Good stuff. Oh, it's like I'm back at my residency interviews now. So, my journey actually started out from a younger age. My older brother actually has pretty significant developmental and cognitive delays. And so we actually spent a lot of time around physicians, therapists, just healthcare professionals for really most of my early life. That was my first exposure to the field. And, as I was getting older, going through school, I think I actually decided I'd want to be a doctor earlier than average. I was later in high school when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I had those early experiences. I, of course, love the sciences. I love the thought of becoming a doctor, and that's what I've been able to stick with through all this time. It's hard to believe that later high school was 10 years ago at this point. That's how long of a journey this has been, but it's really where it started off for me.
Yeah, man. It's awesome how, everyone that goes into medicine has a different, a different event in life that kind of inspired them to go into it. Obviously you got some people that just are like in a lineage of doctors,
Right.
that they go into it because that's what their family does.
Right.
So there's those people, but then there's people like us who had an event early in life, or a family experience like you with your older brother, and that, inspires them to go into it. And become somebody responsible for taking care of these people. So you mind if I share my story about? No, it's okay.
Which story?
It's kind of funny, kind of not, but it's the story of like how I like the day that I knew for certain that I wanted to go into medicine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was, when I think I knew that I wanted to be a doctor from an early age, but I wasn't certain until I was in high school.
Mm.
And it was one morning when I was getting ready for a swim meet. I was a high school swimmer. I was competing in the States for the 100 butterfly, and I had the state championship trials in the morning. And I think it was February, and I was inside the house with my mom, getting ready to get my ride to the swim meet, like an hour away. And my dad stumbled in through the front door on one foot, hobbling on one leg.
Oh,
And my mom and I were like, "What's going on? You okay?" And he was like, "No, I call an ambulance. I think I'm hurt." And I'm like, "What happened?" And he just hobbles on one leg into the kitchen, lays on his back, and says, "I just had a chainsaw accident." We're like, "Whoa." So
terrifying words to hear.
So we're waiting, on our kitchen floor for the paramedics to arrive, and it was like a blur, but I remember just holding a towel over my dad's foot to hold it in place while we were waiting for EMS. It was definitely one of the most intense moments in my house. He had severed probably the majority of his big toe. They were able to reattach the big toe, but he's lost sensation in the big toe. But structurally, it's great.
Hey,
I mean, it's a little bit shorter. It's like 2 centimeters shorter, but
still got it.
Either way, yeah, that experience was, at the time I was like, I know I want to work in some type of operating room. At the time, I thought it was going to be surgery or neurosurgery or orthopedic surgery. Now I know it's anesthesia, right? On the other side of the drape. But so yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's something you're never going to forget, especially as a high school kid. We seeing something like that for the first time, certainly on a family member, that's scary. That's very scary. I mean, even
it could have been so much worse.
Healthcare professional, seeing someone close to you, in that way, it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways. And our intensivists in the ICU, they tell stories about, they have patients whose loved ones are intensivists themselves, but when they're seeing their loved one going through all this, it's like all the medical knowledge and all the experience that they had go right out the window, because all you see is your loved one going through something like this. And yeah, it's no wonder that has stuck with you even after all this time.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an experience I'm never gonna forget. And it's one of those moments that I'm like actually grateful that it wasn't worse, because I mean,
absolutely
could have been a much worse outcome than losing some sensation in the toe.
Right.
But who's your Super Bowl pick?
Well, after the performance of the NFL refs for the AFC Championship game, I have to say I'm rooting for the Eagles. With how they played against the 49ers, I have a feeling that the Eagles have the momentum going into this game, but I can't say I'd be surprised either way. And of course, we know a couple of very passionate Philadelphia Eagles fans, and if they see this, I don't know how they'd respond to us picking the Chiefs.
You know who you are.
You know who you are.
But yeah, I cannot pick the Chiefs just by principle.
Yeah, I know. All the Chiefs fans out there, you know what you did.
Oh man, that was a rough game to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bengals, obviously they didn't play at their best, but
especially in the first half.
Yeah, first half was tough to watch. I mean, 2 picks, but at the same time, in the fourth quarter, it was anyone's game. And,
Absolutely.
you know, 1 or 2 penalties made the difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's entirely true. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, people will say, you know, there's often a penalty on every play and you could always call it, right? And I agree with that. I mean, there's always some form of holding or block in the back or what have you on most plays, but you can always tell the plays they choose not to call it on if it just happens to be in the fourth quarter during the last couple drives.
With 20 seconds left.
Yeah. It's
15 yards out of the red zone.
Yeah, it's aggravating. It's just aggravating to see. And of course, being in Cincinnati, we would have loved to see the Bengals go back to the Super Bowl, but I think they'll be okay with Joey B.
Yeah. And truthfully, like, I think the Bengals were a better team this year than they were last year.
I agree with that.
And I think the O-line just had, you know, a rough game at the wrong time.
Well, they came together for the last 2/3 of the season very well after an extremely rough start, but then 3 of them got hurt.
Yeah.
In the last game of the season, first playoff game, and I mean, what can you even do when that happens, right?
It's tough. And that was the biggest Achilles heel of the Bengals for the last couple years. So,
right.
You know.
And, you know, now that the Bears have been dead on arrival for the past couple of seasons, you know, having the Bengals root for has been quite nice. But
yeah,
next year.
I'm definitely deep into Bengals fandom. I mean, because I have a large percentage of the season to root for another team because the Patriots aren't making the playoffs.
Which a lot of people are happy about these days too.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You guys had your time.
We've definitely earned at least 5 to 10 years of sucking after our dynasty.
Here's the important question. Bill Belichick hears a knock at his door. Who is it? It's Tom Brady. He says, I'm coming out of retirement and I'm going to be your starting quarterback. What are your thoughts? 47 years old or whatever his age will be when the season starts.
I don't think Tom has the tools around him on the Patriots still to even perform well in the playoffs. I would be excited about it.
Right.
I still think 47-year-old Tom Brady is better than 25-year-old Mac Jones. Being honest. But
I feel a lot of Patriots fans are out on Mac Jones these days.
Yeah.
After some of what happened last season.
Yeah. He's a good kid, but I don't know. He currently doesn't have the leadership abilities that Tom Brady does.
Yeah.
And, you know, many quarterbacks in the league that, you know, as much as it begrudges me to say Pat Mahomes for the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good leader for them.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the teammates of,
but not better than Joey B.
Of course, Joey B is
not Joey Shiesty,
but Burrow, Mahomes, you know, Allen, Herbert, Lawrence, like these are kind of the guys that are now defining quarterback play in the AFC, and it's hard to measure up to that at this point. But we'll see what happens.
I saw a stat today that the Chiefs and Eagles have the same record and same number of points scored on the year so far.
Really?
It's like they're both 16-3 with like 528 points on the year.
Wow.
So it's gonna be an interesting game.
Incredible.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah. Whatever happens, I hope it's close. Just so we have a good game. Like no one wants to watch Super Bowl and see a blowout, unless of course you're an actual fan of the team that's doing the blowing out of the other team. But
yeah, unless it's Tom Brady's Buccaneers blowing out Mahomes' Chiefs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were unhappy with that.
That was so cathartic. I think I almost reached nirvana during that game. So an important question is, do you think that any two people watching this video could beat us in 2-on-2 gunfight? Modern Warfare.
Yeah, Modern Warfare 2019 gunfight, 0 chance.
0.
Get the thought out of your head. No. You know how many quarantine 2v2 gunfight sessions we played during early COVID and dedicated study?
We literally, like, going back to like study breaks from step 1, we had nothing to do. No bars were open.
No.
The gyms were closed.
No, coffee shops were closed.
Coffee shops. So when we weren't studying, we were playing Modern Warfare Gunfight.
Yep.
And man, that shit was fun.
Oh, it was very fun. Yeah, a bit limited now in our time, given that we're not roommates anymore, and of course the difficulties with a residence schedule, but yeah, that will forever be cemented as probably like the peak of our gaming skills.
I don't know, man. I'm still beating teams 1v2 sometimes. When you like join a game and then your teammate backs out after like losing the first round, and it's just you versus two like sweaty palmed hardos, and they're like going after you. And, like as soon as you win a couple rounds on your own, then they start playing more conservative.
Yep,
they're like,
they
wait a
don't
minute.
rush anymore.
They're like, wait a minute. We got to be
slow
careful with this ninja. Like he's sneaky. We gotta like we can't rush or he's gonna kill us like in his own spawn. But yeah, open challenge for any of you out there that think you can kick our ass in Gunfight. 2v2. Gamer tag is TJalby94
and Da Bears. So be ready.
I'll literally put our PlayStation names in the description. And do we want to put a wager on this?
I don't know. That wouldn't be very personal finance oriented of us.
I mean, I've budgeted out $50 for video game betting this month. So
what a coincidence.
So
have I.
Yeah.
But no, it's easy money.
Easy money. So challenge is open. $50. Anyone who can beat us in 2v2 gunfight. One try. One game. Best out of one. All right. Two interesting questions for you.
Okay.
So if you had $1 billion wired to your account and you had to spend or invest it in something other than spending it on yourself.
Right.
Like it could be either a philanthropic cause, like, charity, or it could be an investment into, either a nonprofit or a business or some endeavor that you think will improve the world.
Right.
What would that be?
So it's actually part of the difficulty with a amount of money like that, because you could actually do anything. If you were to win like $1 million, $2 million, like we all have some ideas of what we want to do right now, like pay off the house, pay off the student loans, like replace the old clunker you've been driving around. But, $1 billion, really anything's open to you at that point. So, some of the things that initially come to mind would be like, paying off like family's houses, like my parents' house, like my grandmother's house, and stuff like that. College funds for like my cousins and my little brother, that kind of thing. It's funny you bring up charitable causes. One cause I'm actually very passionate about is like animal rescue. And my dog, who's actually here, you may have seen at the bottom of the screen once or twice over the course of this interview.
He's lounging over there right now.
Yeah, he's a big lazy dog, and I got him from a shelter about it's like 3.5 years ago at this point. And I worked at a shelter actually closer to us for a couple of years as well. And that would be one of my sort of philanthropic like causes that I would want to put money into, like improving funding, improving facilities, outreach, that kind of thing. And dog, cat, other like animal rescue. It's something I've always been, really wanting to make a difference in. So those are at least the first things that come to mind.
Last question for you.
All right.
What is one thing that you wish you knew at 18 years old?
Another hard-hitting question. I think we often think about, of course, as we make mistakes in our earlier adult years, as everybody does, and oftentimes it's the best way to learn. But I think if I could go back and talk to my 18-year-old self, I would tell him to give yourself a break, be patient. You don't have to have your entire life figured out when you're 18, even though, going off to college, figuring out what you need to do with your life is tough for a lot of people. And of course, as you go through those late teen years, early 20s, that's probably the most growth you have as an individual. You kind of figure out who you are as a person. And so I would say, like, go have your experiences, get out there, make friends, figure out what you want to do. Don't be afraid to take chances, but most importantly, let it happen, right? Give yourself time to learn. You don't have to figure it all out before you get back home after your first semester of college. And the process takes a very, very long time. I think part of medical training is, you're pretty much on a linear path. Once you get into med school and you decide on your specialty, it's 4 years of med school, 3 to 7 years of residency plus or minus fellowship. Then you start as an attending. It's pretty cut and dry. It's certainly not easy, but it's straightforward. But a lot of the softer skills and the earlier experiences that a lot of us have, we have a lot of anxiety about the future and figuring out what we feel like other people our age or older than us have figured out. But like I said before, everyone's just figuring it out as they go along. So take a breath, give yourself a break if you make a mistake or you don't feel like you know enough or know as much as you should. And know that as long as you keep with whatever you're doing, good things will come. It just takes a while. What about you? Like if you were going back to that age, you knew I was going to ask you.
I was afraid you'd ask me that.
Yeah, you knew I was going to ask you.
So I would have said something similar, but my twist on it will be you're young enough to where your whole education, your career could burn down right now. And you're so young that you could start now and do and be anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that is definitely not exclusive for people that are, smart enough to be in medical school. Like, find your strengths, lean into them, because there are people that are, much less intelligent than you and I,
Mm-hmm.
that were intelligent enough to figure out what they're good at, figure out what their strengths are, and just triple down on them,
Mm-hmm.
and are successful beyond their wildest dreams.
Mm-hmm.
In all different areas, business, art. I could name all kinds of different areas,
Mm-hmm.
YouTubers,
Right.
like, who are we kidding?
Mm-hmm.
TikTokers nowadays,
Right.
like, they're all over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And also that, spend time and effort and invest in your interests and what sparks your curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody should have to follow the path of somebody else that they look like. I shouldn't say it that way. You should not have to, I need to state this correctly.
Mm-hmm. There's
There's no one way to succeed in any area. I'm going to be an anesthesiologist. He's going to be an anesthesiologist. We both lead very different lives. We both would kick any of your ass in COD, but we have different interests as well. And, I like to make videos. He likes to do other things.
Right.
Back when I was in college, I used to think, when I was 18,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that to be a doctor, you have to study biology, you have to do research, you have to do exactly this recipe of activities to get into medical school. Nowadays, we're finding out that's really not true as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That will get you into medical school, but there's also music majors who get into medical school. I have a close friend that is a music major.
He was a concert pianist before getting into medical school.
Yeah, English majors. And that's just a very small microcosm of what I'm talking about. That relates to us. Like, follow what you're interested in, and down the road, you may find that could end up being your career. What you're interested in, your passions, your artistic, creative energy that you put into something could make you a living.
Absolutely. And actually reminds me of a quote that I heard recently. So another good, I think, personal finance resources, the Money Guys show on YouTube. And they were talking about a client of theirs who he had 3 children, all very successful in their chosen fields. And they asked him, what was the advice that you gave to them, as they were growing up? And he said that, the best piece of advice that he gave them was, whatever you can do that puts you in the top 20, 10, 5% of people at that thing, you will be successful if you do that. Whether it's being an artist, being a chef, going into medicine, going into law, going into business, whatever it might be, if that's what you're good at and you put all of your passion into that, the success will follow from that. People will recognize those skills. They'll see the passion. And I mean, you don't feel like you're worked a day in your life if you're doing what you're passionate at. So, I think it really follows along with what you were talking about. And there's no one path. And for our, future physician, current physician, audience, or people who are watching who aren't in medicine at all, you can apply that to whatever it is that you're passionate about and just really want to go do.
Absolutely, man. And another thing that I wish I understood earlier is the principle of compound interest. It does not just apply to money.
Right.
Obviously, it is an excellent thing to understand for money. But if you think about your skills and your knowledge and what you put in your time doing, if you or I wanted to quit medicine and become a saxophonist,
that would go poorly.
But if we did that, if you or I did that and we loved it and we put in 2 to 3 hours of practice every day for 2 to 5 years, we could be professionals. And
right. And as someone with currently, of course, no musical skill whatsoever, but of course, with this example, like, it's the passion. That's the key. Right. The passion to put in that work for years to become incredible at it.
I would describe it as consistency is necessary to become great, but passion is often necessary to be consistent. So consistency does not come easy. It's very easy to miss a day of UWorld questions, studying for medicine,
right.
Sticking
to your budget, sticking to your diet, whatever it might be.
Yeah. That discipline is not easy. If you want it bad enough, you'll do it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there's no getting around it, consistency, and of course coming from passion. Like, you're not going to get good at something overnight. You're not going to be the best version of yourself doing whatever it is without being consistent over a long period of time. And it's not easy, but what does anything worth having come easily?
Nothing. And just to speak candidly, like, this podcast is, I think of it that way too. I don't expect these early podcasts to do well. Like, my voice, I'm still finding it. But I do this because I know that there are many different ways that I and people that I know and can have on this show can really help people. So 2-3 years time, hopefully we can look back on this video and smile at how many people that we've helped and reached with this information.
Absolutely.
Then when I have you on for another episode, we can
keep an eye out, folks.
The follow-up video will be the video of us sweeping the people that accepted our challenge for Gunfight 2v2. So, but anyway, yeah, man, like, we could talk about this stuff for days and days.
Oh, absolutely.
But
yeah, too much to fit into one podcast, especially for something as broad as, studying in medical school or personal finance. But
we could literally have like a 10 to 20 podcast series just on finance.
Oh, absolutely.
And on step studying and becoming a doctor and all these things. But
and of course, like, let us know in the comments, what do you guys want to hear about? If you don't care about the money stuff and want to hear more about med school stuff, absolutely, you can make that happen. But we're here to do what will help people when it comes down to it.
Well, dude, I know that you are in the midst of a grueling ICU nights schedule right now. So the fact that you came out here, with Timber and hung out in the studio for this podcast tonight, I really appreciate it, dude.
Of course. Thank you for having me on. I love the opportunity to talk about things that I'm passionate about, and it's a really fun experience. I'd absolutely do it again.
Heck yeah! Next time we'll have a VIP suites with professional grade mics,
live studio audience,
like light and sound. Yeah, laugh tracks, the whole bit at our awful jokes. So yeah, dude, appreciate having you on, and until next time.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you, guys.